So, welcome, Nadim. Thanks very much for taking a time out of your busy day, I'm sure, to have a chat with me.
It's a pleasure.
So, just to kick off, if you could tell us a bit about who you are and a bit about your company.
Yeah, sure. My name's Nadim Sadek, and I'm one of the founders of Shimmer AI, and I'm the CEO there too. And just by way of background, because people always kind of end up thinking, well, what does he sound like? Is he a West Country Continental or something? They can never figure me out. I'm half Irish, half Egyptian, and I grew up in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and then ultimately Europe, going to school and a bit of school and university in Ireland before really starting a career in the UK.
Fantastic. Well, that's a bit of diversity for you, isn't it?
It
Some
is.
really interesting experiences there. So, how did you get to where you are? How did you become the CEO of this company?
Well, when you speak to ancient people, sorry, there's a long story, but I'll tell it as briefly as I can. Um, my training was in psychology, a little bit in philosophy as well, but mainly I'm a psychologist. I went into consumer psychology. I was curious about why people do things and why they get kind of connected to brands and what sort of communications they respond well to. And I was therefore in market research or consumer insight for a number of years. I started a company in the 90s in London. It became the biggest of its type in the world by the early 2000s, and I sold it to WPP, which is a very big multinational communications group. And I helped to run two of their global networks um, in about 50 countries. Before I really effectively left that industry and started my own brand, I had weirdly, because there is no good reason for this, I bought a small island off the west coast of Ireland, and I went and lived there for a little bit, well, for about 12 years actually. And I started, instead of, just kind of sitting around looking at the sky, I thought, well, why don't you practice what you preach? You've been so busy telling people what to do their brands for decades. Why don't you do it yourself? And so I started a whiskey brand, a music brand, and a food brand. And it was fantastic. We had salmon being sold in Harrods and House of Fraser. Our whiskey was winning awards, and the music went to number one. So it was a really, really good fun time. And I suppose that was my period. First bit of the career was analyzing and understanding brands. Second period was running them. And the third thing I thought then was I met a lot of people who are very creative and they're great at operations or great at distribution or great at conceptualizing things, but very few of them kind of had the package to run a branded business. And I wondered whether it was possible to put together some software, effectively AI, to become an AI brand management platform. And I worked on that for a while, formed a company. It did really well, got millions in annually recurring revenue. Um, and it was sold some years ago to private equity. Um, after which I moved on to where I am now, which is running Shimmer, Shimmer AI. And Shimmer is an automated advertising business, which completely is run by AI. So we understand the strategy to sell a product well. We generate the creative assets for an advertising campaign that brings that strategy to life. And then we deploy it again automatically through different media channels to matched audiences. So it's kind of a hands-free service. It's almost like on autopilot for our customers who give us their products. We understand them, create the assets for them, place them into the media channels, and help to sell them. So we drive e-commerce through AI advertising effectively.
Brilliant. And what's a typical customer look like?
There's almost two answers to this. I mean, we're initially we only launched 18 months ago, and we've been very lucky to be successful and to get a lot of traction in publishing, book publishing. The actual kind of automated advertising product can sell anything and it can create advertising for anything, particularly where there's a deep inventory, where people have a lot of stuff, and a discoverability challenge. People can't find all that stuff you have. Plus some psychological depth because we profile the products to bring out the really emotive stories within them. and where there's a lot of e-commerce. So where you've got deep inventory, discoverability challenge, psychological depth, and mainly e-commerce trading, our advertising goes. To begin with, we focused on one vertical only to see if it really worked, and it does. And so we worked in book publishing, where, I mean, it's an astonishing business, really. It goes beneath the radar a lot, I believe, including with me until I explored and researched it. It's about 10 times the size of the global music industry, for example,
Wow.
which is amazing, I think. And in English alone, there's probably 100 million books that have been published, and 95 million of those have never been advertised. So our principal customers, I answer you with very long answers, don't I? But the answer to your question, who's our customer, is the publisher of books, and that's mainly publishers, but it can also be authors.
Oh, it's brilliant. No, brilliant answer. And and some data there that's fascinating. Because in the modern era, you think if you talk to somebody below their age of 25, they might say, "Who buys books?"
Yeah, yeah,
Nobody.
that's
But
right.
actually, books still sell.
Books do
In
still
numbers.
sell.
Yeah,
There is less reading going on, and I think we've become multimodal creatures. It's very difficult not to look at your phone while you're looking at TV. It's very difficult not to be kind of fiddling around with one screen and then another screen when you're working. We've become I don't know if it's dilettantes or butterflies, or what the right description would be, but we're used to being very stimulated.
yes.
And that's why really kind of avid readers talk to you about how they love escaping into a book where there's no distractions and they don't get off the sofa, and they stay up all night and read. It's a very unusual experience nowadays to do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But as I said, it goes hand in, it's, I was talking to somebody today, a book I recommended to them, and they're listening on audio. But then
Yeah.
they say, I need to buy the physical book because I want to take notes.
Hmm.
I want to reference it. It's an active book. It's a book that's helping them in the business. So
Yeah.
therefore, it's very specific, and therefore they realize just listening, they really need something that they can turn back to and implement things. So it's quite interesting. No, that's brilliant. And
I think actually just on that point, sorry, there's if you pause and consider it, the format of the product of a book, a printed book, um, has been around for like hundreds of years now with very little change. There's a bit of audiobook and there's a bit of digital, e-reader book. But I'm working with a company that is producing a new product format for books, and it's really interesting. You buy an electronic file from them, like an ebook, but at any point you can press, like if you're reading a book in your chair, you decide to take the dog for a walk, it'll switch to an audiobook at the very same point. So you don't have to
oh
currently you have to
wow.
buy two different files. But as you're walking, you might say, "Oh, I bet that third paragraph would really irritate Asari. I must send it to him." And you instruct the book to take that paragraph, find you in my contacts, send you it, and say, "This is from this book. Wonder what you think about it." It might be a book about monsoon drains, and you think, well, is monsoon different from a typhoon? Can you illustrate that for me? And it illustrates it for you. Or you can say, I completely disagree with the thesis of this book. Are there any contradicting authors around who have written things which, would give me a different perspective on this? And it'll cite those for you. It'll summarize, what's known about those books. So it's in a sense a kind of interactive, multimodal living book that you can argue with, and learn from. And I think some of these things are going to be seen soon enough, which are a more fundamental change in the nature of the reading experience.
Yeah, that's going to be fantastic. I mean, it's something I would love, but
Yeah,
also I can imagine young people would love, children would love because, as you said, children are growing up in this world where they've got the iPad and the laptop and as you said, all these multiple screens. But if they could get into a topic
yeah,
where it would give them that, but you're
yeah.
staying on the topic, so
Hmm.
they're not being distracted by something outside of the topic. They're staying on the topic, but it's exciting because they can get a video, they can get picture, they can get something else. So it becomes an exploration, a bit like how people of our age we used to use a library. You could go in a library and kind of spend hours just looking at books in a library. But now this is a
Yeah.
multimedia format. This is fantastic. So that sounds very
You're
exciting.
You're about 100 years younger than me, so don't be saying people of our age.
You'd be surprised. Well, I'm 60 the end of this year, so I'm not
I'm
that
ahead
young.
of you. I'm ahead of you.
But yeah, so brilliant. Do you have so in that sense, are they is that you're promoting them? So do you have many competitors in your, is there much competition for what you're doing?
There are three parts to our machine, if you like. We're a compound AI business, and we bring together lots of different models and lots of different tools. The three main buckets, though, are we identify the strategy, we generate the creative assets, and we deploy into media, finding matched audiences. All three of those each have their own competitive sets, but nobody is doing the tying together of that, the chaining together of those into a single automated workflow. I'm sure they'll come. Um, our secret sauce, if you like, is the way that we psychologically profile things so that we understand the most emotive things about whatever it is that we're advertising, and we bring those to the attention of people. So, we end up with, I think currently our metrics are that we're getting 6 times more attention than the benchmarks. So our ads draw 6 times more eyeballs than they should. And I think that's because of the psychological basis of them. And then they drive currently more than 12 times the amount of traffic to e-commerce, which means that once we've caught the attention, what we're managing to convey and say is motivating people to go and explore that product and to buy it. And,
That's
in that sense, we don't currently have a competitor.
fantastic.
Yeah,
So
good.
one of the things that's people that love to ask, or they ask me and they ask different people in business is what what mistakes or learnings on the way. Obviously, this is newer, but you've got a whole raft of experience in all so many different businesses and different places, and done very, very well. Obviously, what what sort of the learnings and things you've learned from the mistakes you've made?
There's two actually. One is fairly well, it's regarded as prosaic and a bit mundane, but actually it probably deserves more glamour than that. I have underestimated the importance of distribution more than once in starting businesses. And I see it happening a lot. It's because it's not kind of all that cool. Like, the cool thing is conceiving of it, packaging it, communicating it, making it, talking about it. But getting it to a place that somebody can buy it, whether that's kind of proper listings on Amazon or, getting your inventory into a warehouse where it can be rapidly delivered and so on. I saw that with whiskey. I underestimated how important distribution was with whiskey. How do you get it into those airport shops? I thought it'd just appear there. It's like naive, stupid. But
Yeah, yeah,
so I think, never underestimate the importance of distribution. Um, that's the slightly more prosaic one, as I said. The deeper one, particularly for a CEO, I mean, there are different sorts of CEOs. There are CEOs who, without making it too highfalutin, are kind of visionary CEOs, and there are others who are much more operational. But if you're the kind of the visionary sort of CEO who says, "I see the thing that we have to do," um, it takes a lot of strength to hold fast to that because you've got to listen to people that are around you. You've got to watch what goes on with your business as it grows, and gets up off its young feet and starts walking and striding in the world. But having the strength to be committed to your vision and to realize it and to bring it to life, despite the naysayers, the people that aren't quite as convinced, it's a lonely furrow that you plow, if as a visionary CEO, and it takes some strength to A, hold your vision, and B, do so whilst reasonably listening to observations that are made to you. So,
yeah, yeah.
you've got to have humility but conviction, and that's a tough old gig.
Yeah, yeah. And we've seen people who have, it's easy to see the people who are successful today and say they had brilliant vision years ago. But people forget that when they started that vision, a lot of people said
They're
this is
mad.
not going to work.
Yeah,
They're mad. Yeah.
yeah,
Like when Gates said he wants to put a computer on everybody's desk. When we look at that today, that makes perfect sense.
yeah,
But in the
completely.
1970s, a computer was the size of a living room.
Yeah,
So the idea you're going to put that on everybody's desk, people thought, and also you needed a PhD to work the thing.
That's right. That's right.
So when you said going to put it on everybody's desk, people are looking at him thinking, "Oh yeah, how's this going to work?"
Yeah,
So yeah, and you could say Steve Jobs. Many people had visions as well. I mean, if it was it the Model T Ford? If you had asked the market when the Model T Ford came out, what would you want? They said we want faster horses.
that's right.
They
That's right.
wouldn't have said they want a car.
Yeah, that's right.
So sometimes you have to invent something before people even can
Yeah,
see that there's any. Why do I want this?
yeah,
What's wrong with my horse?
that's
Um,
right.
so
That's right.
yeah, very interesting. So do you have a routine? Is there such a thing as your CEO routine?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too, I'm not too wedded to it, and it's changed since COVID. Before COVID, I had a routine. I'd always like to get to the office by about 8:30. I ride motorcycles. I would really love to get on my bike. I'd take the longer road. I'd have a bit of very focused, visceral fun before getting to work, and I'd feel quite energized, and then start doing things. But maybe that's just not relevant anymore because we're a fully remote business. None of us go to an office. So what I do now is I wake up fairly early. I probably wake up at about 5:30. I don't do much for about an hour. I kind of read BBC football gossip and look at a few things on news channels and gradually just kind of become aware of things that might have happened overnight. I quite like doing that. Coffee, little breakfast, and then probably by 8 or 8:30 I'm working. And I've tried to have the discipline of always working out rather than working in. So I'll deal with all external emails, initiatives, things that I need to do with other people outside of Shimmer before I turn my attention to dealing with people within Shimmer or processes. That's been a pretty successful strategy because you're alert and available to your, important network of customers early in the day, and you prioritize thinking about them when you're still full of life. It's quite easy to lose yourself in kind of inside company issues, like were
Absolutely.
you unhappy about that meeting yesterday, and all of those sorts of kind of conversations, which you can bloat to take all the time of day if you want, but actually being focused about doing things. So I try not to have meetings before 10. So between about 8 and 10, I'm doing all the external stuff, and then from 10, it's kind of a bit of a free for all. And I've obviously had too many screens in my life already. I can't really do one thing very easily at a time. But I work pretty fast too, so I write quite a lot, and I write fast. So that's when I'm most focused. If I'm either writing a presentation or an article, I write regular columns and things. I'm writing another book at the moment. If I do that, I'll be really focused, but probably not for much more than an hour at a go. And then I'm, tip-tapping on various things. I like being available. I like trying to help people with any issues that they're having. And then kind of towards the end of the day, I just kind of spend a bit of time with the family. But we have an American team, and as they're on the East Coast and 5 hours behind, like at around 9 or 10, as they're beginning to get to the end of their working day, I try to just kind of correspond with them a little bit. I notice some of the things they've posted on Discord. We work on Discord on a messaging platform. I try to not let them feel like they're all alone and that Europe's gone to sleep. So it's
Yeah.
it's a bit of pastoral care, but it's also just a bit of professional interaction. And
No,
then
that's brilliant. I
and
love the bit actually when you said you always work out rather than in. Start by working out rather than in. That's an interesting way of putting it. I've not seen it put that way because one of my biggest challenges with business owners is getting them to work on the business, not in the business.
Mhm.
And most business owners find it easy to, as you said, to start the day by just getting bogged down with all the internal stuff.
Yeah.
And when I say to them, well, when do you look at the big picture? When do you look at your business? When are you growing? When are you
Mhm.
looking at that side? And they say, oh, I just don't have any time for that. It's just, I'm just bogged down with
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult, as you said, when they're burnt out at the end of the day and then they get round to thinking about the external. They're just too tired to even
Yeah.
do it, put any justice to it. So they
It is.
kind of like that's it, and then the next day back in it again.
It's tricky
Um,
because you're itching to do it. You're itching to help your friend who, you're working with, or somebody who you've recruited that's finding it tough, but you don't do it. Just get rid of all those emails, do all those things that you have to do, make the calls that you have to make, and then feel free. And I deal better with people internally because I know I've done the good work. I've moved
yeah,
on a little bit.
we call it the eat the frog. Eat the frogs early in the morning.
Yeah.
Get them done, because
Yeah.
if you don't, you're gonna struggle to do it later in the day.
Hmm.
Because once you start getting into stuff, it's very easy to get distracted. So, from a success point of view, if I'd say success to you, what what sort of people come to mind? Who do you admire? Who do you see as successful?
It's very hard not, if you're in business, it's very hard not to admire the people that have made a lot of money because it's kind of the metric that defines success. I
Yeah.
don't love that. I'm not sure I completely subscribe to that being the key metric, but it's true. We watch ticker tapes across our screens, we look at share prices, we look at bottom lines, so anybody that's made a lot of money, I know has made a huge effort to get there, and so you got to admire them. But kind of to do something slightly not so obvious, I think you've got to admire, you know, in the course of my various different ventures, I've come across so many good businesses. Like there is a regional packaging business in the west of Ireland. Huge, actually. Like, I mean, they turned over 50 million euros or something. That's a lot of money. They
Mm,
have a factory, they have a warehouse, they have vans, they've got people, they've got health and safety, they've got, lifelong career loyalists. They don't get celebrated, but my goodness, that takes a lot of effort, you know,
yeah.
to be focused, to not always want to kind of be the biggest and the best and to become the Smurfit or the something else of the whole world and to be the biggest packaging business, but to not, I don't mean to say know your place, but to be comfortable with the scope of your ambition and to say, I'm happy with a 50 million, thing that's bought me a decent house, that's going to pay for my kids, you know, tuition, that'll help me, give them a deposit to buy their house, all the things that kind of parents end up kind of liking to do for their parents, for their kids, I suppose. I really admire the people that can find, and again, I don't mean that to be kind of a diminishing term, but who are content with defining the horizon of their ambition and sticking to it and succeeding
Yeah, yeah.
and not wavering, having a stable life. I've started too many businesses. I've had too many months of no cash. You know, um it's the crest and the trough in the sea. That you're always on with startups, and
Yeah.
as opposed to that, you can actually steer a course through life that is much steadier and easier to deal with. And I think they're really under-saluted, those people. You know, they're brilliant.
No, absolutely 100%. It's one of the reasons I love doing this. It's one of the reasons I love, as I said, connecting and promoting people who run businesses, whether it's relatively small businesses up to, as you said, people who have a 50 million euro business is no small business. I did some research, and I found, I think it was 96% of businesses don't do a million turnover.
Mhm. Yeah,
96%.
yeah,
So actually, if you do a million plus, you're already in the top 4% of successful business
that's
owners
interesting.
in the country.
Is that in the
So
UK?
that's in the UK. So when I speak to a business owner who's totally frustrated and doesn't believe in themselves, or feels
Mhm.
that they're not doing well, and I say to them, "Do you realize you're already in the top 4%?"
Yeah, yeah,
And
amazing.
that puts a different spin on their perspective. And I said, "Look, this is not easy. You've already broken through that top 4%. Now maybe we can make you in the top three, top two. Let's go for the next level up." And then they feel a little bit different about it, because now they're thinking, "Oh, okay." It's a bit like saying, "Oh yeah, we're only in the we're only at the bottom of the Premiership, and you say once they realise, well, how many teams are in the Premiership? Well, there's only 18 out of 20 teams out of hundreds and thousands of people who want to play football.
Hmm.
It changes your perspective a bit, and sometimes you have to get people to look up a little bit and say, actually, we're doing better than we think.
Yeah,
And you've got here, we can, the next journey is actually starts to get a bit easier now, because now
yeah,
you've got a bit of traction in your market, you've got capacity, you've got staff, you've got team. It's much easier to coach somebody with £1 million plus business than somebody who's got a £50,000 business.
yeah.
Where do you get time to coach? Where do you get
Yeah,
time to implement anything? If you've
yeah,
got £1 million business, you probably will have staff, and you've got an office, you might have vans, you've got a bit of capacity to even breathe and think, because
hmm,
you're not doing everything anymore. So that
yeah,
gives you it's easier to make things happen, and you can delegate. You might
yeah,
have a financial controller, you might have a marketing person. So now you can actually say, right, yeah, I can get that done, sorry, because I can get X or Y to do it.
yeah,
And that's really interesting. So
yeah.
yeah, so that's really interesting. So what about next 5 years for you? 18 months, you've got some good traction. Where do you see yourself maybe 5 years time, or will you be exiting by then? I don't know. Where do you see yourself?
We're actually having a discussion about this at the moment in the leadership team because the business is so interesting. What we're doing is so scalable that it's quite easy to contemplate a business that just continues to grow for 5, 10, many more years. It goes
Mm,
from vertical to vertical, it goes up and down the sales funnel. It integrates more and more of the kind of the marketing value chain. Um, I think there's always an intersection between where you are personally in life and the position they have in the company and the business itself. So I'm very lucky that, my co-founders, one is in his middle 70s. He doesn't want to do it for another 10 years. I'm 62. I'm okay. Probably don't want to do it for 10 years, but I can do it for a good bit more. But then I've got um, two in their 40s and one in their 30s. Um, so they're all much more brilliant and much more talented than I have ever been. So, my role is really just steady hand on the tiller, um, perhaps doing the vision thing, making sure that lessons I've learned are shared and that we kind of tolerate and navigate as well as we can. That's kind of my job. Um, so I think what we'll probably do, and I think it's a good way for a lot of business to work, is to say there are some here, either on the cap table or in the leadership team, who will want a liquidity event in a nearer horizon. Let's say 3 years. I think it's often hard to do below 3 years. You're going too quickly. And there are others who want to do this as their career. They're going to end up
yeah,
being
yeah.
the CEO or the COO or whatever position they want to have in the company. And to allow that to happen, it partly depends on your investment profile and what the funds that you brought into your business, if you are funded, want to do. Most funds want to 10 times return within 5 years or something. And, you know, that puts a certain pressure on your growth rate and your plans and whether you look at an IPO or a trade sale or whether you just kind of keep expanding. But kind of purely looking at the business itself, there's no reason why it'll have its time. It won't run out of runway to grow or things to do.
Hmm.
So, there may be a team that's come after me that say, actually, we want to do this for 20 years. We want to be that packaging in the West.
Yeah, yeah.
And good luck to them. I would support them in doing that.
And it's funny, Nadim. One of the difficult questions I have with business owners is, what's the exit strategy?
Hmm.
And a lot of them look a little bit blank at me at that point, because they haven't really contemplated life after them.
Yeah,
And some of the points you made are definitely hit the nail on the head. Is that you got different age groups, different people at different lifespans, and sometimes not picking out that, while somebody wants to keep the company going for another 20, 30 years, that's, as you said, a career. You might want to be exiting the next three.
yeah,
But if you plan for it, you could do that. I've got a client at the moment where we're exactly the same age, 62, and we can work on a strategy. I said,
Yeah,
you don't want to leave right now. You're enjoying what you do. That's
yeah,
fine. But
yeah,
you see that you're starting to find it some things a bit challenging in terms of age and starting to think about next steps and that. But why don't we plan it now?
yeah,
So in the next 3 years, it's not something that just suddenly fall off a cliff moment. That it's just I've got to stop because I'm getting tired or I'm
yeah.
feeling too old for it. But
No,
I'm not enjoying that moment. But rather than enjoy the next few years and have a plan to slowly hand it over to somebody else or sell it or whatever it is you want to do. Um,
I think it sounds like you're giving very good advice. One of the tricky things I would advocate doing exactly what you're saying, which is talk about it, come to a plan, have a liquidity event in 3 years' time where some shareholders and some founders might want to exit and others can continue, all pretty transparent and all the rest of it. The problem is Alex Ferguson. He said that at Man United, and the team were rubbish as soon as he said he was off. You know, even if he said I'm leaving in 3 years, they stop working for that coach because they start thinking about who's next. So you can stimulate a bit too much of
the
the
tricky one, isn't
jockeying
it?
and the internal kind of machinations about who's coming, will we get an external replacement, blah 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 blah. So you want to manage that transparency with still a clarity that the person in charge is in charge. And
Yeah, it's funny you say that because Klopp. Some people said it was brilliant to announce early that he was leaving, and some people felt it was a mistake because yeah, because did it have the right effect on the team? And it's an interesting, as you said,
Mhm.
how open do you be about certain things?
Yeah,
Does it make people feel, oh well, forget about him because worry about the next steps?
yeah,
Does it make people change their way that they perceive you and all those things? Yeah, and
yeah,
sometimes it's very subtle, as you said.
yeah,
It's not necessarily people think it specifically, but it just has that effect on them because
yeah,
emotionally they're connected to this person, and suddenly they're thinking, I don't know anybody else,
yeah.
and it can have strange impacts. Really interesting, yeah. Um, do you have any book recommendations that any particular books that you recently read or love to read or you'd recommend to people?
You should read my book, which is called Shimmer. It has been an Amazon bestseller and it's available in loads of languages now. It's about the development of AI and how it affects all of us, but particularly publishing. So it's not really a mainstream book for everybody. I think there's some good books about AI. There's one called The Coming Wave, written by Mustafa Suleyman, who is now CEO of Microsoft AI, but he started DeepMind. He's a Londoner. Really clever book. Found it a bit repetitive in the final third, but the first two thirds are really stimulating. Um, I've also just finished reading an unbelievably long book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, because the thesis of that book caught my attention, which is that we're living in a less violent world. And boy, that's hard to believe sometimes when you look at the news and you see
Yeah,
terrible things happening. But actually, when you read it, it's sort of it's a terrible journey through infanticide, fratricide, genocide, you know, all the terrible things that religions have done to each other across the millennia, that all the different things that different invading hordes and tribes have done to each other. And you kind of do come to the conclusion that sure, there are improvements. We live in the safest and quietest civilization and society that there's ever been for humans. And I found it just an incredibly stimulating read. Um, and I think that's a good recommendation. If you want
yeah, sounds
so
fascinating.
my little book is not very long. It's only 140 pages long, and Better Angels of Our Nature is just heavy and long, but really rich. So
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the great things that books give you is it can change perspective
yeah.
because people constantly say to me, I don't watch the news because it's too negative. The world's terrible place." And I say to them, I often Obama said it. The first time Obama said it, I thought he was an idiot, and I
Hmm.
reflect on it since, and I always quote him. He says, "In human history, when would you want to be born?" And he
Yeah.
says, "It'd be now."
Hmm.
You
That's
know,
right.
for most people, if you're a woman or a minority of some sort, have a disability, people of all sorts around the world, if you could be born at any time, life was probably a bit rough. Was much worse before. you
You
know.
know, I think I completely subscribe to that, but I am noticing that some late millennials and pretty well all of Gen Z is really pissed off with us. And they're saying, look at the mess you've left us. I'm not even sure I want to have kids because my grandkids will definitely be living in a furnace, will definitely, have all sorts of terrible billionaires running the place, da, 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 da. So I think we might have hit the sweet spot. Those of us of a certain age are sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. As I said, every generation has to review what's happened and take a view as to where to go. But yeah, no, interesting. So we're coming towards the end anyway. One of the things I did want to ask for a bit of fun is if I gave you £100 million, it's a lot of money, to invest in business, what would you do with it?
It's a funny one, I honestly have no idea. Um, because I think money is just fuel. And if you don't have a clear sense of A, your destination, and B, the vehicle you're in to get you to that destination, a, a huge lake of fuel is kind of meaningless. Like, I might just need a pint out of it. I might need the whole lot and more, depending on what I'm trying to do. So, uh, so that I'm not leaving you with a stupid, completely stupid answer, but that is what I feel like. There is
Huge money.
there is there is no real answer to what you would do with 100 million unless you know what you're trying to do and how you're getting there. Um, we've just been going through an investment round at Shimmer, and ultimately our funding partners convinced us that we needed 3 times more money than I initially thought. Um, and now that we're doing that, it actually makes a lot of sense because we are able to consolidate our first mover position, take advantage of it. We can move more rapidly to developing features in our product. We can scale teams so that we're a more robust organization faster. You know, so long as you know what you're doing and you have a clear roadmap on your product development, your service, or whatever it is that your business does, and you know the sorts of people that you're going to need if you need people, or technology if you don't need people, then the more the merrier. And
Yeah.
but you know, the difference for me with Shimmer between 10 million and 100 million, I wouldn't, I would probably put in the bank and not do very much with the extra 90 for a bit,
Yeah.
until
Yeah.
it's great to have it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with security and you can make money off money. So I suppose I would do that. But I wouldn't say, oh, I'm going to go and buy a car dealership and that's exciting. You know,
Great way to burn money is to have no vision and just spend a load of money on some idea that seems like a great idea at the time, but burns a
trying
lot of
not to
money
burn
for sure.
money, trying
Yeah.
not to burn money is a good discipline.
Yeah. No, 100%. Absolutely. And just to finish off, really, if people who are listening to this, they're in business, what 2 or 3 tips would you leave somebody in business right now from your experiences?
I think I think if you're going to put running a business, creating a business takes a lot of energy and a lot of your life, and they are finite resources. So go carefully and choose wisely. And I think choosing wisely involves suiting your own nature. If you're somebody that's easily made anxious or is prone to feeling stressed or who doesn't like insecurity, don't start a business because there isn't one that doesn't have that. Go and get a good job, develop a career. You can make tons of money that way too, if that's what you want to do. If you are going to start a business, I think, make some fundamental choices like, are you doing something that nobody has done before? Bigger risk, more gains. Or are you going to iterate? Like, are you going to be a curtain manufacturer? Well, guess what? There have been some of those before. But you
Yeah.
you might have a cool way of thinking about textiles or, a new hanging system or something that, makes it cool. sell it to IKEA, whatever. But if you're going to do something like one man torpedoes to the moon, which nobody's done before, like, okay, that's you have to be really committed, and that's going to take a lot from you to do. So I think kind of try to find where on the spectrum your nature sits and how long you're
Yeah,
committed to,
yeah.
and how convinced you are. And then obviously you have to execute well, and that involves, getting the product right, getting the commercials right, getting the communications right.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And it's really interesting because, you know, I say to people that most people generate a business that is an iteration of something else. There's only so many unique Dyson vacuum cleaners, Apple iPhone, that only so many people are absolutely inventing something completely that nobody's seen before.
Yeah,
Most people, as you said, if you open I don't know, even when McDonald's opened, was it just a version of somebody else's
yeah.
Burger King or whoever? You can be very successful in business selling sandwiches or whatever it is that loads of other people sell, but you just do it, as you said, in a slightly different way to others. You don't
Yeah.
always have to come up with this magic pill, because sometimes it's because maybe nobody wants it, is why nobody has thought of it yet. It actually isn't
I
going to
think
work.
I think the moon torpedo is waiting for its.
Yeah, somehow I don't think that's going to quite sell, because it's going to be very difficult to come back. Might get you there, but I don't know how you're going to get back.
Yeah.
But Nadim, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned lots. I'm going to get your book as well, so that's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
Have
Thank
a read
you.
about that, and yeah, just thank you very much for taking a little bit of time to have a chat with me.
It's a pleasure. You're nice to talk to. Good interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you.